Hey, today is Monday, April 13th. The PowerPoint for the next 2 weeks is going to be PS2-1, Newton's third law. In the first unit, we discussed Newton's first and second laws. Both of those laws are very useful in describing what happens to an object when an unbalanced force acts upon it. For Newton's third law, we're going to talk about how these forces always pair up. They always act in pairs. So in the first quarter, we actually saw this when we talked about gravity. So remember how the Earth was pulling on the moon with its gravitational force? Well, at the same time, the moon is pulling on the Earth with its gravitational force. It's the same thing with you. You are getting pulled down by the Earth, but at the same time, you're pulling up on the Earth. So these forces always act in pairs. So this unit is PS2-1, Newton's third law. There's a CK12 reading. We'll do a lot of examples. And then at the end of the second week, for extra credit, you can do a windmill Ferris wheel. There's the benchmark about Newton's third law. So here's the benchmark. You can take the notes on page 69. This is PS2-1. You design a solution to a problem applying Newton's third law involving the motion of two colliding objects. So for your solution, it's going to be the windmill project at the end of the 2 weeks. Okay. On page 68, your My Way for this unit is to describe an example of Newton's third law. There's lots of different examples. You can do swimming, you can do skateboarding, surfing, how rocket ships work, how airplanes work, how cars drive, and how guns and cannons can recoil. So if you're going to look up something, search it up as Newton's third law plus rockets, or Newton's third law plus airplanes, and stuff like that. Now, as you can see in this GIF, this is a really cute GIF from the movie WALL-E. WALL-E is drifting through space from Newton's first law with the inertia. It's going to keep going in one direction. But then luckily, he has a fire extinguisher. So when he when he blows the fire extinguisher one way, the fire extinguisher pushes back so he can go the other way and he can go up and meet with Eve. Lastly, there's a CK12 reading on page 70 and 71. So this is a really good way of practicing and learning more about Newton's third law because it explains it in more detail.
10 seconds to self-destruct. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
So what is Newton's third law? On page 69, you can take notes on this. So Newton's third law says that every force has an equal and opposite force. In other words, there's an action and an equal and opposite reaction. So that's a good way to think of this. Sometimes you don't really notice the reaction, and that's probably because the strength of the force is exactly the same, but the mass of the two objects working on each other is not exactly the same. So when you have the same force right here, but a different mass, then you have a different acceleration. So that's why even though the Earth is pulling down on you with its gravitational force, you're also pulling up on the Earth with the same gravitational force. But because your mass is very small, the acceleration is really big. But the Earth's mass is really small, really big, therefore its acceleration is really low. And so over the course of the next 2 weeks, we're going to have a lot of examples of how this works, how for every force, you're going to see that there's an equal and opposite force, which allows things to move, things to fly, things to push each other, and stuff like that. All right, see you tomorrow.